Welcome to our Día de los Muertos Part 2 episode. And today we're going to be talking about some more specific things regarding El Día de los Muertos and the celebration and the variations that there are and just different cultural aspects to it. And this one isn't going to give as much of a broad description of the celebration like we had in our last episode. If you want to know the overview of it, watch the last episode because this one's going to be a little more specific about Afro-Mexican culture as well as some other aspects. But please enjoy. ¿Qué onda? Soy Sebastián y este podcast es Otomi. For all of my non-Spanish native speakers, this is Sebastian, and I'm a high school student in the Bay Area. I've got the facts and the opinions. Join me as we discuss topics of society, culture, identity, education, and life. All right, so last week we were talking about las Catrinas, right? If you recall, that feminine skeleton in really fancy clothing. So we were talking about la Catrina and the importance of the skeleton and la calavera in this celebration, right? Now, it's very common to, as part of the celebration, people do face painting, get their faces painted with skulls and skeletons. But there are also dogs that a lot of the time are painted. And these are there are different ways to pronounce it in that there's the Nahuatl way, but that's one way. Then you have the Hispanicized way, which is the way I learned from my grandparents, and that's the way they say it in Mexico. So the dog is a Xoloitzcuintli. That's usually the Hispanicized version, or even like my uncle, the way he says is Xoloitzcuintli. And that's the Hispanicized version. Now I've heard an Anglicized version, which is like Xoloitzcuintli, which, okay, they ruin it there. But I mean, this dog, it's a hairless Mexican dog. It's been traced back centuries, into our ancestors. The Mexica, even I believe the Maya, they had these dogs, the Xoloitzcuintli, and the name is derived from a Aztec or Mexica, an Aztec god, the Xoloc, and Xoloc is a god who is represented with a face of a dog, which is perfectly represented with the Xoloitzcuintli. And also, so Ixcuintli is dog in Nahuatl, from what I know. So that's what it means, like dog of Xoloc. And the way I was introduced to this dog was really with my uncle, who is an enthusiast of animals, especially Mexico. He always tells me Mexico is one of the most biodiverse countries in all the world. He's very proud of it. He loves biology. He loves animals. And he inspired me. When I was little, I had all kinds of different types of pets. I had geese. I had chickens. I had iguanas. I had cats. I had dogs. Chihuahua, tarantulas, which I am arachnophobic, but I mean, he still got me the tarantula. And keep in mind, I never owned these in the US. It was just when I visited Mexico that I'd have all these animals. It's easier just to acquire them. Here in the US, it's very difficult. All the licenses, they're more challenging to acquire, and they're also a lot more expensive in the US. Like, for example, my uncle has in the US, they call them axolotls. In Mexico, ajolote. He has an ajolote. He's always wanted one. But that's where, I think it's a lot harder to get one here in the US than in Mexico, because literally in the lakes, next to where he lives. There are ajolotes in the caves. They're located in there. Ajolote, the name comes from Nahuatl, right? It's the Asholok. So I mean, that again, a lot of the what I really like also about all these animals is a lot of them have names derived from the indigenous population that lived here before the Spanish arrived. So about the dog, I was the Xoloitzcuintli is it's a dog that I've just was very passionate about. My uncle, he said he'd get me one because he loves dog. He wants a calupo, which is one of the other Mexican dogs. There are, I believe, three Mexican dogs. The Chihuahua, which most people know, the calupo, which is one that a lot of people do not know. But it's a very interesting dog that I heard is closely related to wolves. So my uncles told me, and I'm really interested in that one. He wants one, and he said he'd buy me a Xoloitzcuintli, which is the third one. It's a hairless dog. However, Xoloitzcuintli, they within their own litters, they can have hairless dogs and dogs with hair, which I think is really interesting. Obviously, it's based off genetics. If you were going to use some Punnett squares, likely you'd be able to solve the frequency with the allele frequency of hair versus no hair. That's the thing. I really wanted one because it was just such a cool dog. It's something you don't really have here in the U.S. I have not seen anyone with a Xoloitzcuintli here in the U.S. In Mexico, I have. I've seen many, but I mean, here, no. And I've always wanted one, but my parents were like, you're not going to get one. Why? Because it's a hairless dog and they really don't want a hairless dog. I guess it creeps them out. I've always wanted one, but basically, besides the point, why I'm bringing this up is because they're a pretty important part of the celebration. I've looked into in this book that I've been reading, that I've read about the Mayans by the anthropologist Jacques Sustel. A lot of the artwork has dogs in it, and these dogs are hairless dogs, but they're portrayed in the gods. They're portrayed in the pottery and the art of the Mayans. Now, the Aztecs are the ones who gave them the name. After all, the name of the dog is in Nahuatl, right? It's in the language. So it only makes sense that, well, the dog's name is derived from the Mexica, from the Aztecs. But regardless, I think it's just in general a symbol of a pre-Columbian Mexico. And that relationship between dog and man, which people a lot of the time say, well, some people might think it's prescribed solely for Western civilization, as in European cultures. But I mean, no, this is something that happened around the world in ancient Egypt, everywhere. There was this relationship between dog and animal. So now when we're talking about the celebration, the role of the Xoloitzcuintli was that it was supposed to be a guide to the afterlife. As you see, it resembled that deity, Xolok. And Xolok is actually a god of lightning and death. And he, the roles of these dogs was to guide the deceased into the afterlife. And much like what we've heard about Egyptian pharaohs and their cats, a lot of these Aztecs and these indigenous individuals were buried with their dogs, with hopes that their loyal companions would guide them in the afterlife and be there by their side. And that's just, I think, part of the nature of how we're all really alike in our relationships with dogs. I think it's something very natural, very interesting. Besides that, I think that's the big thing, that they're a symbol of Mexico, of culture, of identity. And that's why, like, one of the soccer teams, soccer, one of the football teams is the Xolos of Tijuana, and their mascot, which I have literally 4 jerseys for this team. I do not care at all about the team, but I like the mascot, so that's why I have them. I asked my uncle to get them for me. Their mascot is the Xoloitzcuintli, and that is why that's why I support that team. Even though, Morelia Monarcas, number one, that's like my number one team, but I really like that pride that comes with the dog, because it is like the national dog. It is a representation of Mexico. And what I like most about that dog is how it's so different. It's hairless and it's beautiful. It has beautiful dark skin and these really, like, a lot of the time they have clear eyes, like amber eyes, and they're just amazing dogs. And I've heard they're very loyal, and I really think they're also an essential part of that indigenous celebration, and that's how they come into the Dia de los Muertos, as part of that cultural aspect of the afterlife, and the way that the dogs are connected to that. And again, there's just this companionship with the dogs. And actually, Christopher Columbus and a lot of those first explorers to the New World, which was, of course, not a new world, but I mean, those first European settlers, those dogs caught their eyes. They saw these hairless dogs. And one thing that I was always told, something I've heard many times, is that the Mexica, the Aztecs, would put the dogs, they tuck them in their blankets, they tuck them in their clothing. They would tuck them for warmth, because they had those bodies because they had just skin, they didn't have any fur, so you could feel their warmth. And I'm telling you, that's true. I have pets, many of them, and feeling their skin, it's very warm, and they're hypoallergenic. They don't have fur. That's the thing, except for the variations that do have fur, of course. But I mean, the ones that don't, they're very warm. And that's the thing. They're really essential. They're imperative to that pre-Columbian society at this point, because they're huge. They're depicted in the art. They're depicted in the culture. And they first came, if you're going to look at the history, they came thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago with the first migrants who came from Asia through that land bridge, right, to America, to the Americas. And from there, they weren't the dog we see today. The breed that we see today developed around 3,500 years ago, the result of a mutation. They lack premolar teeth, and the fact that they don't have hair is the result of a mutation. But obviously, that didn't really necessarily hinder their ability to succeed and to flourish and to live, because they're not dead, right? They're still living to this day. But what they are is the result of a mutation. But yeah, we're gonna get to our next part of this episode, which is about Afro-Mexican celebration of El Día de los Muertos. So I hope you learned a little bit more about the Xoloitzcuintli, and it's a dog that I want to have, because I think it's a symbol of pride, a symbol of Mexico, a symbol of culture. It's something that symbolically would mean a lot to me, a way to connect with my ancestry. That dog is really an avenue for many people to do that. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that segment. Now let's move on. I think it's important to talk about this, but the Afro-Mexican celebration of El Día de los Muertos. And this is one that we really touched last week, but last episode during the Afro-Mexican episode, but this one's about La Danza de los Diablos, which is danced in Guerrero and Oaxaca. And basically this dance, which we talked about last week, but we're going to get more in depth this year, this week, just because I've done a little more research on it, looked at it deeper. I've watched many videos of it, because it's honestly fascinated me. I love this stuff. But yeah, it basically came to Mexico through the African slaves who were brought. Now, African slaves were brought to numerous different regions in Mexico. They were brought first to, Veracruz, but then they also came to the West Coast, so Guerrero, Oaxaca, to work on plantations there. Then they were also brought to work in mines, and with rocks. And that actually, which is something I didn't know as much about, but they were also brought to places like Michoacan. And when I'm talking about Michoacan, I mean specifically Morelia, where my mom's from. The African slaves were also brought to Zacatecas, where I've been to the mines there. Really amazing mines. And also in Guanajuato, where I've also been to Guanajuato. It's a beautiful city and also a state. And yeah, these are all places that are not necessarily coastal, but they brought slaves because of the mines. They brought them there because of the mines. Morelia is named after Morelos. As I said, Morelia used to be Valladolid. Now it's Morelia after Morelos. And Jose Maria Morelos, he was actually triracial. Basically, he had a mix of indigenous, Spanish, and African blood. And he was a revolutionary. He was just like Vicente Guerrero, who's known as the Afro-Mestizo. He was virtually an Afro-Mestizo. Not necessarily. He was more mestizo, as in he had predominantly indigenous and Spanish ancestry, but he also had a significant amount of African ancestry. And that's what he's noted for having that mix within him. And this dance was done, it celebrated the Danza de los Diablos, la Danza de los Diablos, on Día de los Muertos, right? And it was actually started as a celebration to the African god Ryuja. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Apologize, but based on the phonemes that occur in Spanish, I'm just going to say Ryuja. And that's how it started. But this dance has a very, very, has many layers to it. First of all, it's composed of, there are many specificities to this dance that I think are worth mentioning that make it really, 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 really interesting. So firstly, this dance it basically starts with 24 dancers, and these 24 dancers are in 2 columns. Then there are 2 distinguished dancers. One who's the big devil, or el viejo, and then one that's la minga, or la vieja, and the mother of the devils, right? And she usually has a mask, and she dances around. And I've seen that it's interesting that in a lot of these ones that I've seen, usually the woman playing la minga she's black, but her mask is white. And I'm thinking that's interesting. Not like her character's black, but I mean the actual person playing this character is black. But for some reason the mask it's a very white color. And I thought that was interesting. So the masks, if you have not seen the masks of Los Diablos, they're actually kind of terrifying, not gonna lie. I think they're awesome. I think they're really cool. They have these deer antlers that stick up. They have hair on them, horse hair, beards that are really, really long, these beards. I remember when I first saw them, I was like, wow, okay, it's kind of scary. And they have these animal jaws on them as well. And usually el viejo, he's usually a little more ornate than the other devils. Just in what he's wearing, he's a little more elegant. And of course, because these dances with the 24 dancers and everything, they happen in the streets as well. So as you can see, there's a specific structure to the dance that occurs, even in formal and informal settings. And then there's always a 3-player band. And in this band, there's someone who plays the harmonica, someone who plays the charrasca, which is a donkey or horse's jawbone that's played percussively, and then a tigrera, which is, I'd say that this makes the dance creepy, to be honest, because it sounds like the roar of a tiger, and it's almost disturbing to hear. It makes it kind of eerie. But this Dance of the Devils is kind of a way of rebelling in a way, protesting, because other than the fact that it was a celebration it originates from that celebration to Ryuha, the African god, but landowners of these African slaves didn't really let them dance to God or the saints because they weren't often considered to be people, just because of that racism. The black people were not considered to be people. And for that reason, they said, okay, if we can't dance for God or if we can't dance for the saints, we're going to dance for the devil. And that's what they did. They made a dance for the devil. And that is how this amazing cultural identity, cultural dance has arisen. I've seen some videos where I've seen that a lot of people are proud, especially in Oaxaca and Guerrero, to have these dances. And they say, mira, aquí tenemos la tercera raza de México. La tercera raza. And I say, the third race of Mexico. There's no third race. There's no hierarchy of races. Everyone's the first race. Everyone is. Because if we start considering, la tercera raza, clearly you're making a hierarchy of races. And the African race is not one to be considered last. Remember, it's a triangle. It's a trinity. And one is not given more value, more equity than the others. They all share the same amount of importance and the same amount of prestige. But yeah, this dance is honestly something that's amazing, and it's become a very important part of Dia de los Muertos for the Afro-Mexican community. And I thought it was worth mentioning. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you had a great Dia de los Muertos. I know here in my house we had a little ofrenda set just to honor some of our dead relatives, and hopefully they visited us and we got to have a nice little talk with them. But yeah, if you didn't really know too much about it, Dia de los Muertos, why is it November 1st and November 2nd? Maybe you didn't know it was on 2 days. Maybe you didn't know the specifics. Maybe you didn't know that it was indigenous. Maybe you thought it was a Mexican Halloween. Hopefully after this episode, you definitely do not think that, because that is very far from the truth. Almost somewhat insulting. But after this episode, hopefully you won't believe that. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll see you guys in our next episode.